Hey guys, Filthy Robot here. In this video I want to talk about 5 small developer decisions in Civilization 6 that are going to have big gameplay impacts for us players. Number 5. Units are now required to have at least enough action points as the cost of a tile to enter that tile. In Civilization 5, if the movement cost of a tile was greater than the remaining action points on a unit, the unit would still move into that tile and would just lose all of its remaining action points. In Civ 6, if the unit doesn't have enough movement points to enter a tile, it can't enter that tile at all. On the surface, this may not seem like much, but it has a massive impact on early game scouting, war in all ages, city placement, and chasing units. Basically, the world just got bigger. Every hill or forest still requires 2 points of movement, but rivers now require units full action points to cross. Scouts may have gotten 3 movement points, but they no longer ignore terrain cost, and with the new terrain interactions, they're just not as effective at exploring. Expect to have many turns where a scout has a movement point left, but no terrain that it can enter that will actually advance the amount of tiles you actually explored. War is likewise affected. In Civ 5, a unit on a hill or forest could be attacked by a standard 2-move unit standing 2 tiles away. The attacking unit would cross the flat tile with 1 movement point and use all of its remaining movement points to attack into that hill or forest. Same with attacking across a river. The unit would move 1 tile closer to the river, then attack across the river, expending all of its action points. Now that just isn't possible. Now the attacking unit will have to spend an additional turn moving into position, so that it has full moves to attack into either that hill, river, or forest tile. If anything, this should further decrease the value of melee and horse units while increasing the value of ranged units. Basically what it's doing is it changes the distance between locations by decreasing unit mobility, and units that can already bridge that gap, such as ranged units which have 2 range, are going to get more shots before they're closed in on by the melee units. Finally, an interesting situation that I hadn't expected arose while I was playing. I was trying to capture an unescorted settler with one of my military units. The settler was on flat land when I crested a hill to end my turn adjacent to that settler. On the settler's turn, I moved into a nearby patch of rough terrain only separated from me by a single piece of open terrain, yet I couldn't capture it. I didn't have the movement points necessary to both cover the ground it had vacated and move into the hill that it had moved to, despite the fact that I was adjacent to it when I had ended my previous turn. This sad little chase continued for a number of turns until the settler eventually escaped. This is a great indicator of how combat's going to be versus a target that doesn't want to engage. It's going to be really difficult to run down a target because of the new terrain interactions. Moving on to the 4th little change with big implications. Great people are no longer city-specific. They have unique bonuses that are not shared by other great people of the same type, and the great person pool is now shared by all players. There are 2 major impacts of this change. First, whereas the competition in Civilization 5 was to generate the most great people, specifically the most number of great scientists, the new competition in Civilization 6 is going to be about both the quantity and quality of the great people you're generating. It may be that in some scenarios it's better to not take the first great person offered to you and instead wait for a higher quality great person to spawn. Additionally, you can have the information to fine-tune your decision-making regarding great people. We now have the tools to see how close our opponents are to their great people. Wondering whether to build a shrine or a granary, looking at your opponent's faith per turn might make that decision more clear for you. Wondering whether you should rush a great scientist for a military tech that might let you get the jump on an opponent, now you can see how long it will be before he can even the score with his own great scientist. The competitive side of me is quite pleased with this additional information, and I'm really looking forward to getting a chance to play against other people with this type of mechanic. Additionally, great people generation is now empire-wide instead of city-specific. In Civ 5 terms, this is the difference between building a garden and building the Leaning Tower. This should fit in really well with the specialized city design and limited wonder placement that's part of the Civ 6 design. What it means is that now if you build a wonder, a city district, or a building that increases great people generation in any city, it's just as valuable as if you built it in the capital, which is totally different than the game design of Civilization 5. Moving on to number 3. Workers have been replaced with a new unit called a builder, and builders instantly construct tile improvements, but they have limited uses, 3 in most cases, and at least in the early game, they can't build roads. The implications of this change are enormous. As it stands right now in Civilization 5, workers are a long-term investment whose value only begins to plateau in the Renaissance, and even then will likely remain useful throughout the game. They're 100% essential for war, and at least in multiplayer you can often tell the skill of a player by the number of workers they've invested in and the number of the tiles they've improved in the early game. In Civ 6, builders are going to be an on-demand resource. You're not going to want to build more builders than charges you need to actually improve the tiles you're working right now. You may want to have one builder hanging around for repairs or tile purchases, but without the early ability to construct roads, you're better off investing your production elsewhere. This is a fascinating change for the early game opening, and it opens up lots of early game production for things for alternate infrastructure, either building wise or potentially even military in the early game. Moving on to number 2, roads. There's no way that I, as Filthy Robot, mass builder of roads, was going to get through this video without talking about roads in Civilization 6. Roads got really friggin' weird. At least in the early game, roads have been moved from the domain of workers to the domain of trade routes. A trade route sent between two locations will create maintenance-free roads at a rate of 2 tiles per turn until it's reached its destination. Furthermore, and this is according to literally a direct response from a senior gameplay developer for Civ 6, regardless of whose territory they're in, anyone can use roads. And as I'm sure you know, that's a huge change from Civilization 5, where roads could only be used by their owner inside of that Civ's territory. The changes to roads combined with the decreased mobility of units in rough terrain means the way that wars are going to work in the early game is going to totally change. In Civilization 5, winning wars was about mobility. Who had the ability to focus fire more efficiently with units such as knights and archers, basically extending the ability to focus fire through mobility. In Civilization 5, the advantage often went to the defenders, as the defender could construct roads in their own territory, and that would allow them to cycle more horse units and more archers onto a single tile than the attacking force, which was restricted by terrain. However, now, with the reduction of the ability to control the terrain you're fighting in, the advantage should be a lot more neutral in terms of where the attacker and the defender meet. The attacker still faces the problem of reinforcing units over long distances, and the defender of course reinforces at the site of the attack or nearer to the site of the attack. However, the lack of ability to place roads solely for defensive purposes and the lack of the city having an initial garrison shot means the defender is going to be less able to rely on static defenses and terrain, and is going to be forced to build more of a standing army if he wishes to remain safe. Taken together, these things suggest that war in Civilization 6, at least in the early game, is going to look quite a bit different than war in Civilization 5. Finally, the number 1 small change with huge impacts are Eureka Moments. Every science and civic tech has a trigger that grants 50% of the progress towards that tech, and this trigger is called a Eureka Moment. Again, a quick caveat, the event organizers have asked that I make it clear that the values of anything can be adjusted between now and release, but I think the current value is really indicative of game designs that are going into the production of Civilization 6. This is a pretty big value, again, so this is right now at 50%, and this means that Eureka Moments are supposed to be massively impactful on how quickly these techs are researched, and are supposed to be part of the early game decision making. So regardless of the final value, I expect that they're going to remain pretty significant to the impact of the early game. This is another interesting change. Eureka Moments are designed to be active ways in which players can increase their progress through the tech tree or civic tree. They occur when players go out and do something, often something really specific. Yes, some of them do occur almost by accident, for example meeting another civ, but many require investing in a certain unit or doing something that you wouldn't normally do. I expect as players get more familiar with the early game and opening builds start to undergo some systematic analysis, I bet we'll start to see build orders that try and optimize accomplishing multiple early game Eureka Moments. The timing on them is such that you're not going to get all of them, and we're going to see people have to prioritize some Eureka Moments relative to other Eureka Moments. Part of that decision might be about what tech you absolutely need now, even if you can't trigger the Eureka Moment, versus what techs can you put off until later and then therefore get a discount as you accomplish their Eureka Moment. As long as there's enough diversity in the build and tech orders, I'm really going to look forward to mentally mapping out some of these Eureka Moments. It feels like it could be a little bit like chess, where it requires players to take a look at what's going on around them and plan out 3 or 4 techs or 3 or 4 buildings in advance to really coordinate both their timing on their production as well as their timing on their unit movements and their tech timing to reap the maximum amount of benefit from this type of mechanic. Anyways guys, hopefully you've enjoyed this video and it's been as thought-provoking for y'all as the Civ 6 early game was for me. And as always, if you're enjoying the content, hit the subscribe button, and I hope to see more of you on my channel. Cheers guys, Filthy Robot out.